everybody. Welcome to InPsightRadio. I am your host, Danielle Egnew, and you are a fly on the wall to where? To everywhere. That's right. Everywhere. Yay, us. Well, happy October, everybody. And of course, we're rolling into October of 2019. And I always want to specify the date, just in case you are listening to this at a later time. And I am excited today to be joined in the studio by a guest that I've had on a lot on this podcast. It's because I love having her on. She's very interesting. She always brings a fascinating perspective. And you will know her as an herbalist, as the owner of Vintage Apothecary, as a healer. Vintage Apothecary is a store located in Bridger, Montana. You'll also notice that if you happen to follow me on, Instagram or Facebook or whatnot, she's also my sister-in-law, which is kind of cool. But that's not why I have her on. I have her on because she's a wealth of information, and she just happens to be a bestie of mine. And she's from Connecticut, which is going to get really important in this podcast for a minute. But everybody, I want you to welcome on to the show Melissa Scianna. Hi, Melissa.
Hey, everybody.
Now, Melissa is here because we are going to talk today about the haunted East Coast. And why is the East Coast of the United States so much more haunted than other portions of the United States, or haunted in a much more pointed way? And again, I kind of had the spoiler here for you that Melissa is from Connecticut. And of course, for those of you that are not familiar with the map, well, Connecticut is on the East Coast there. So Melissa and I are hosting at the end of this month the Haunted Bridger Ghost Hunt, where we're going to be going through, and Melissa has sussed out some historical haunted locations for us. And of course, I'm going to go do my little haunted, psychic thing, and we're going to lead groups through, and Melissa's going to talk about herbs, and I'll let her talk about that. But Melissa, welcome to the show, and what can you tell our listeners who are familiar with you about why you think that the East Coast is so haunted? I mean, you grew up there, so what's your take on that?
Right. It's so interesting because living in Montana, I don't have quite the, I'm not experiencing as many ghosts as I did as a child. But as a child, it was like a normal part of my life to have ghosts around all the time. There's just such a high concentration of ghosty things in New England. And seriously, ghosts were a part of my life growing up.
Now, there's a lot of reasons that I know that the East Coast is very haunted. Now, one of the reasons is especially in the New England area. So we're just going to focus on the New England area because we could talk, the East Coast is also Florida. Okay. So, so we're going to talk about the New England area and it being very haunted up in that region. And that is an area that has not only a lot of limestone caverns, but it also has a lot of iron-based granite.
Yeah. Lots of granite bedrock.
Lots.
Around where I grew up, for sure.
And that granite bedrock is just black with iron, a lot of it. And you can see that in Central Park. If you go to Central Park in New York and there's those big old granite slabs in the middle of Central Park, you'll see this black stone, and it's this granite that is very heavy in iron.
In fact, if you've traveled in New England at all, you'll see that it's just littered with stone walls. Right? There's stone walls everywhere. That's one of the things that we're famous for, is our beautiful stone walls. And they're all made out of granite. That's pretty much the rock that we have there.
Oh, yeah.
And it's everywhere.
Oh, yeah. And I mean, the granite that's there, I mean, you get into some of the low rolling hills, you'll get some limestone there, but the granite bedrock is what is the magnificent ghost magnet in the East Coast. And also, the meridian, the longitude of the East Coast also. And again, we're talking about the New England area. In addition to these major vortexes that are out in the forest. So I would love you to tell our listeners, just to precurse this, when you talk about seeing ghosts all the time in New England, I mean, describe some of these ghosts. Where, when, how? What did they look like? What did they feel like?
Oh, so should I start with the biggest thing, my childhood ghost that I saw every single night of my life.
Because that's not disturbing or anything.
Right.
Okay.
It's pretty interesting because my family, I grew up, my parents still live there, in fact, in a mid-century modern home. So it was built in like the 1960s. So it's not one of those homes that you think of when you think of a haunted house. Right. It's a fairly new home. We were the second family that ever lived there. It's not something that you would expect to be haunted. And I'm not sure the house itself was haunted. But anyway, there was a ghost there.
Do you think it was the land? The land that was haunted, maybe?
Yeah, I do. I think it's remnants of people that lived there before this house was built. So behind the house, within like, I would say a quarter of a mile walk into the woods, into super creepy woods.
Why were they creepy?
Even as an adult, I find them more creepy than I did as a child. They just give you a weird feeling when you walk in there. It feels like something's watching you. In fact, I actually have, I'll get to the story, I guess, but these days I have a difficult time sleeping in my parents' house.
Really?
Because I'm like so much more in tune, I think, with there's a million stories of stuff that's happened in their house. But this one, I'm not particularly scared of this being anymore. But when I was a child, I would wake up in the middle of the night. I was always scared of sleeping.
Well, it sounds like you're on the haunted, creepy woods from hell.
Yeah.
You've got stone walls with granite in them. There's apparently an apparition that's visiting you night after night. So what did this apparition look like?
So it was a man, and he was a big, tall man, but I was a little tiny girl. But he was with me from the time I can remember until, oh my gosh, probably until I was like 15 or 16 years old.
Oh, wow.
And I remember him being there every night. Maybe he wasn't there every single night, but I remember him being there often. And I would wake up and like knowing that someone was there. And I would I would force myself to open my eyes, and there would be a man standing there. And he was tall, and he was scary. Like there was something about him that scared me. Maybe because there was a man in my bedroom.
Could you see his face?
I don't remember what his face looked like. He was white. I remember him being like light skinned.
So you had to be able to tell enough about him to know it was a man.
I remember his clothes.
Oh, what his clothes?
I mean,
like?
He had the build of a man. He was tall, and he had the body of a man, right? He had dark clothes on. He had pants on. Everything was like a dark black, probably black or super dark gray color. He had a long coat, so he had pants and boots.
Interesting.
And a long coat. So, like I can't even, not really like a drover coat, like a Western one, but it was more like you would picture. Like maybe something you would picture a pilgrim wearing or a colonist wearing.
Okay.
Like a long dark coat with like some lapel type things. And he had a hat. He had a black hat too.
And what did the hat look like?
The hat looked like not a cowboy hat, but it had a brim.
Was the brim flat?
Yeah.
Okay, and was the crown of the hat taller?
Not super tall.
But a little tall.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like
it wasn't like
tall.
an Abraham Lincoln hat or anything.
No.
Yeah.
Well, see, that right there is an early to mid 1600s colonist attire. And that's what they wore, those long, dark, and you wore black because it was respectful. It was understated. It was a religious thing. And especially the coat with the lapels. That particular hat style was something that came from England. And then once we got here in America and we were here in the colonies for a while, we began to bend the brims up. Because it kept the rain, it funneled the rain, on the other directions. But that brim was flat for the longest time. So that to me, and also I'm just rating your brain to see the ghost. But it feels like a pilgrim or an early colonist is what it feels like.
And it's pretty interesting just culturally because, I would tell my parents about that as a little girl. I'd wake up in the night. And of course, as a parent, most normal parents at that time were like, oh, it's just your imagination, go back to bed. But it was every night. And so I got in the habit of sleeping with my head under the covers.
Oh my God.
Yeah, because I was so scared, and I would make like a little tunnel to get air in. But like seriously, my whole childhood, it's amazing now. I don't have brain damage. Maybe I do. But then it did
my
come to
God.
a point where every morning I'd wake up with headaches when I was like 12 years old or so.
That's not good.
Yeah, and they couldn't figure out why I had headaches all the time, and they figured it out that because I had the covers over my head all the time and I wasn't getting oxygen. But nobody ever equated it with this man that came visiting me. I mean, I like quit talking about that after a couple weeks probably because nobody was listening to me anyway.
Well, and also it's really interesting that you mention headaches because extended, prolonged exposure to electromagnetic frequencies will cause headaches, blurriness of vision, hallucinations, skin irritations, nausea. So the fact that this being was coming to your house, and I've never been, I want our listeners to know, I've never actually visited Melissa's family house in Connecticut. We are having a moment sharing with you ghosty stuff. Why is New England? Why is the East Coast so haunted? And in all of this, I can feel different areas of the country. I can feel different areas of the world. And so I'm feeling into that area, Melissa, and what I'm feeling is the eeriness, and I feel almost a static, like an electricity in those creepy woods. Mm-hmm. Like walking in, it feels like an electricity in there. That is an area where you have a crossing of underground water sources will create that electromagnetic field in the air. And as I feel into it from here, and tell me if I'm off, I'm also feeling like where they put those original rock walls, I think the early colonists and early peoples that lived there also listened to the Native Americans that lived there. And I think a lot of those rock walls were not only farm walls or boundary walls, but I think a lot of them ran along those ley lines too.
It's so interesting that you say that because I've just recently been reading about the stone walls of New England, and we've always thought that they were things that colonists put up to move the rocks out of the way so that they could cut down the trees and grow stuff and have fields and stuff. And there's some historians, I don't know, in New England that are just beginning to understand that some of those walls are so beautiful. And they've wondered, well, if it's a working farmer that's doing that, chances are he probably wouldn't have gone to the work to make them beautiful. And there's so many stone walls in New England that there weren't enough colonists at the time to build all those stone walls. There just wasn't enough people. So they're starting to realize that they are Native American structures and that they're old, and that some of them actually are curved like serpents. And so I think you're like absolutely right that that the Native Americans actually made some of those stone walls, and we're just starting to realize it now.
And I, what's interesting about that, that's so cool to hear about, because here we are in my studio. We're in Montana. I am feeling Connecticut from Montana, right? And I'm like, what does this stone wall feel like? Let's try it out. But what I'm getting is that those walls were physical amplifiers of a natural energetic causeway. So again, an energy flow. And I'm looking at the stones, and that's all, like, well, you just said it was all granite earlier, but I'm looking at it, and it is all granite.
Yeah.
Those are granite rocks, and some of them are a lot more jaggedy. We have river rock out here in Montana, and I'm seeing some of them being rounded, but some of them are kind of jaggedy looking here.
They're all different. Yeah.
Isn't that wild?
Very much.
Okay, because that's what it looks like. Here in Montana, if you're going to find a stone, if you're going to find stones in the ground, and this is what I'm going to preface this with so folks understand what we're talking about. If you're not a farmer and you don't understand what removing rocks out of a field is, here in Montana, especially in south central Montana, like in Bridger where you're from, or down here in Billings where I'm at, this was an area where the glaciers came by and dropped stones that had been getting ground up by the glaciers and polished. So when you find stones in fields in Montana, they are what would look like the classic river rock. They're smooth, because the glaciers polished them and then dropped them off, not polished, but they rubbed off all the crunchy edges and dropped them in fields. Now, what I'm looking at on the East Coast is not quite that glacier activity. What I'm looking at is naturally eroded chunks of granite that are jagged around the sides. Some of them are smooth, but then other times they're flat. And that's where you find granite rock casings just falling off. And that would be much more akin to, I'm listening to this angel talk about that area. Hold on. They're telling me all about the fault lines, the impact zones of fault lines. And you do have a lot of fault lines in the East Coast. You hear about the moving fault lines on the West Coast, like the San Andreas that are always moving. But there's a lot of those static fault lines, and that fault pressure, apparently, up in the New England area or northern east coast of the United States, you have a lot of tectonic pressure they're talking to me about. And it creates those granite shards or those granite pieces that'll come off just from erosion and the compaction of the plates. So why I find this fascinating is I'm looking at these walls through the ethers. You're apparently telling me there's a mix-up of the rocks in there. Mm-hmm. And they also are on ley lines, and they also are amplifying lines. And some of them, and here, weigh in on this, they feel to me to be creating, almost some of them are trying to create a boundary almost. Like maybe you shouldn't go past them because there's something on the other side of them that isn't necessarily as conducive, or the energy level, like I'm feeling, is crackling in the air. It feels heavy. The air feels heavy.
Yeah, I think that's definitely true. And actually, probably from where I grew up, about 1 mile away, there's a place that, and there's stone walls around it, but that's meaningless because there's stone walls everywhere in New England. But it's a place that like you can't even, it's a terrifying feeling to be there. I have several stories about it. Like I can't, when I drive by it in a car, it makes me nervous. Even my wife, Sarah, has driven by it with me, and she was like, oh, and my children don't like driving over there. It's weird. It's just a road that goes by this particular place. But
I want to go there. We got to figure out. No, because really, usually when we find those those are big vortex openings that feel that crappy.
Yeah. And I've actually had experiences over there where I've been sitting in a car over there and had this overwhelming feeling. It was almost like a voice was like, you got to leave. Something really horrible is about to happen and you can't be here right now.
Okay, now let's talk about that feeling. How many times have you had that, no, you have to leave, get out of here? How many times have you had that feeling in that part of the country?
Oh, I mean, really, that was this never as strong as that particular feeling. But, and it's so interesting growing up there, you just get used to it because that's life. I never even realized it was unique until I moved away.
And you get to Montana and there's like all this space out here.
Yeah, I was kind of like, great. Hey, where's all the ghosts, man?
Well, we haven't been settled since the 1600s out here, so we haven't really laid them up yet. Okay, so here's something I would ask you. So, and gang, this is just sort of a conversation between me and Melissa. You can tell we just kind of braid all these topics, kind of come in and out. Circling back to the entity in your room, did you ever speak to that entity in your bedroom?
Mm-mm. No, I was just a child, and I mostly wanted to hide from it. It was kind of one of those things where I thought if I put my head under the covers or pretended it wasn't there, it would go away.
And would you ever peek out and it was still there?
Yeah.
Oh, that sucks.
Yeah, all the time. That's how I knew he was there every night.
Oh, God. Mm-hmm. And was he standing in one specific spot all the time, or did he move around the room?
No, I only really remember him standing next to my bed.
Next to your bed?
Like looking down at me, standing next to my bed.
Oh, that's really cool. That's just great. Mm-hmm. Ew. Now, did you feel, and for our listeners, we don't cover a lot of, I don't cover a ton of paranormal stuff on this show. I do sometimes, and it's really ironic because my whole background as an intuitive, as a psychic, as a channel, as a translator, medium, clairvoyant, whatever, just don't call me late for dinner, call me whatever, has been in the realm of attempting to bring some sort of education to the paranormal realms, because especially as paranormal TV got on the air, and we made it such a sensationalized thing that, we're just screaming and yelling at ghosts, and we're just trying to get phenomenon on camera, and that becomes the point of the show. What is your feeling about what this ghost wanted from you?
And I've had lots of interactions with different ghost and ghost type energy things, but this particular one was terrifying. He never hurt me. I mean, like, I don't feel like he actually could touch me or anything, but I was scared to death of him. I was a kid. I don't really know what he wanted, but I knew that he was dangerous, which is weird because I think that must mean that he was a dangerous human when he was alive.
That's what I would take it as.
Yeah. I mean, and I don't think that's the case a lot of times with just ghosts that are around. I'm not usually scared.
Well, what's weird about this guy is he feels like, and I get a big religious hangover from this guy.
Well, he was like, he stood up super straight and he was tall and he had his perfect clothes on. I can see, I understand why it feels religious.
And it feels like he was a religious authority figure. He might have done something horrible. Maybe he did something horrible to kids.
And didn't want to.
And didn't, leave the earth because he's afraid he's going to go on a sled to hell with the devil. So he's sitting here going, no, I'm not even going to do that. Okay, so I'm going to switch it up a little bit. And for our listeners, because many people have experienced paranormal activity, they have experienced seeing ghosts. And my friends who come from the East Coast, especially the Northeast where you're from, they all talk about ghosts being part of their culture. And tell me your feelings on fall, the season of fall, of autumn.
Well, I don't know. I've always wondered if this had anything to do with ghosty stuff, but like in Connecticut, fall is a holiday. In New England, fall's a holiday. We celebrate it, and it's not just Halloween. It's like September through mid-November. I mean, it is like we drink cider and we eat apples, and it's something we do every day for like 2 months.
Oh, that sounds fun. I want to go do that.
It's awesome.
I want to do that. That sounds awesome. Okay, so when we look at this, and fall is a holiday, it must feel very specific, the feel of the year. Now, let me explain this real quick to our listeners. I was out with my daughter, and we were walking the dogs. And my daughter is 14. I'm a bonus mom. So I'm always perpetually trying to get my psychic child, and she's very intuitive, to talk about her feelings, because that's how I was raised, right? So I said to her, Nora, can you explain to me how fall feels to you? And the term she used, I thought was fascinating. She said, well, it feels thinner.
Perfect.
And what would your comment be on fall feeling thinner?
Well, I think that just the terminology I already know is that the ethers are thinner and the ghosts are closer to us. So like everything spiritual is closer to us in the fall. And it's so interesting because, and I think Nora's right, it's thinner. In New England, we're so used to living with the ghosts. It's just, they're just a part of our lives, that to have them that much closer is pretty exciting for us. We don't hate it.
Yeah, right? Because you're totally okay. So
we
now,
like it.
So kind of switching gears up here, just kind of in summary, especially the northeastern part of the eastern seaboard of the United States has a very iron-heavy granite bedrock to it. Iron, obviously, is an energy conductor. Also, granite has tiny crystalline granulates in it, and that's part of what makes it be granite. And, of course, we know that crystal amplifies energy. So you've got two energy amplification systems in the bedrock of this area. Now, you also have very specific geothermal pressure. You've got, that the trench out there in the Atlantic Ocean, where instead of a subduction zone, if we go up onto the coast, the west coast of the United States, we have a subduction zone where the Pacific plate is rolling underneath of the North American plate. And that's what causes the earthquakes. Actually, in the middle of the country, in the middle of the United States, there is a buckle zone where you've got the Pacific plate pressing the North American plate. Basically, it's putting pressure on it towards the east. And on the east, in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean, you have the trench there where all of this magma is barfing up at the bottom of the ocean. And it's the Atlantic plate is pushing against the east coast of the United States. But it's not going underneath. It's not a subduction zone. So you've got pressure. Basically, the country is a big sandwich of pressure that's coming in from the plates in the ocean. So the east coast of the United States, especially the Northeast, is under this pressure, this geomagnetic pressure of that plate pressing against it, which is fascinating. And it's got granite. Granite's very hard. And any earthquake that you've ever heard about that's on the eastern seaboard, they don't happen very often. But when they do, they are extremely severe. And they're what we who lived on the West Coast called them slammers. Because it's not like you have this nice little grind where a little plate is just sliding underneath something and it's constantly happening. It's like there's so much pressure that finally just snaps. And when it snaps, that granite is incredibly hard. And granite, here's another thing about granite, people. Granite is a major resonator. If you go up in Montana above Butte, you find ringing rocks. And ringing rocks are just some of these rocks. If you hit them with a hammer, they ring like a bell. And granite is a resonator. So when you do have an earthquake that big, it rattles everything. Now, why am I breaking this all down? Because there is a reason that the northeast coast of the United States is a massive hotspot for paranormal activity. Vortexes, geothermal pressure, granite and crystal-based bedrock and iron-based bedrock, exaggerations of earth energies and ley lines with ancient walls built with these materials that are built to be resonators for miles and miles that these native peoples put up, perhaps to be a barrier or perhaps just to encapsulate some of the energy, and maybe they used it, to track things and whatnot, or to keep things within. Maybe they kept things inside in those creepy woods that were coming out in vortexes.
Oh, and they're finding walls that are also like shaped as sort of a triangle shape, almost like you could drive something into it, and like weird shapes, like round shapes, almost like a pen kind of shape that they don't think are colonial.
No, and I really believe that those stones, because you're a rock hound. You live out in Bridger. You're constantly out in the priors and picking up rocks. So stones are amplifiers, and they can also be barriers, and they can also be something that drives something out of a region. So with this knowledge, and I'm just laying this all in because it's important to get the, why is a place haunted down. Tell me how you felt when you came out of that enormous ghost hut of the northeast of the United States into south central Montana. What did it feel like? What was the difference in feeling?
Oh, I love Montana. Don't get me wrong. But like when I first arrived here, it felt empty. And it felt...
It kind of is empty.
Sort of naked out here, under the big sky, which we didn't have there. But I honestly have very little ghost interaction here, especially where I live. We have more interaction maybe in Montana with the elementals than with ghost type creatures like we did in New England.
And the last show I think I had you on, we talked about the little people of the priors.
Yeah.
So, when you think about, I'm going to ask you a really whopping question here. I'm going to back up a little bit and preface it. So I was to Salem, Massachusetts. I went on a cruise, and we got off the cruise and disembarked, and we went to Salem. And when we went up to Salem, we were on a bus, just driving around. And we got maybe, half a mile from Salem or whatever. And it was sunny, not a cloud in the sky, no pollution, that I could see. And all of a sudden it was as if, and I'm just looking out the window, it was as if somebody put sunglasses on me. But I didn't have sunglasses on because the windows were tinted. The luminosity of the sun was cut by about a third. Like as if there was a giant screen that screened out the light or something. And I remember thinking, oh my God, we must have run into clouds. So I kind of craned my head up and I looked, pure, clear sky. Yet the actual sun light was cut by a third. And I remember thinking it was like if you went into an area that had something in the air that cut the sunlight. And it wasn't 30 seconds after that, the bus driver said, we're coming up on historic Salem, Massachusetts. And I'm like, oh my God, the ethers changed going into this place. So did you ever have an experience like that on the East Coast where the light would cut or something like that would happen?
I actually don't think that's that unusual. So we used to hang out in Salem all the time because that's like, if you want to see some ghosts, that's a place to be. But in Newport, Rhode Island, definitely I've had experiences like that in Newport, Rhode Island. And honestly, at my parents' house. At the house that I grew up in.
And we're talking light cutting. You saw the light change or something. The ethers
it's always
change.
darker at their house. It's always like, it's not really misty. It's not really cloudy because but it's like a darker feeling, which makes it feel like the light's changing maybe.
Well, the light changes though. This is what I'm saying. I mean, I literally watched the light cut and I thought, what the hell? And then I realized, oh my God, this whole place, the ethers of this whole place are different. The atmospheric thickness is different here. And it was almost like a dimensional issue too. It was just 2 clicks off of me being a dimensional rift, which kind of freaked me out because I'm like, oh my God, if we end up rolling into a colonial village and I'm on a bus, we're all going to the stake, man. This is going to suck.
I had an experience actually in Newport, which I feel is like way more... The light changes there a lot more than I've experienced in Salem. But speaking of like walking into a colonial town, I got to tell you this because it's so interesting.
Oh, no, you do.
So
go. Yes.
We were in Newport and there's a tavern there called the White Horse Tavern, which is the oldest continuously operating tavern in the United States.
Wow.
And in fact, in the 1600s, it was a gathering place in 1700s for revolutionaries.
Oh, wow. That's
so
cool.
It has all this history. So we were staying at like a Airbnb. There was no Airbnbs back then, but like a bed and breakfast in this building called the Jailhouse, which was an old jailhouse, which was kind of across the street from the White Horse Tavern.
Right on.
And I got up in the middle of the night and went out on the porch of the jailhouse, and the street was a thoroughfare back in the day because it went to this this tavern was on it. It was one of the thoroughfares in Newport, and I looked out and I saw like crowds of people in colonial clothes, women in dresses, walking up and down the street, just like it was a market day.
Oh, like a reenactment?
But it was, they were somewhat see-through.
Oh my God.
So they weren't really, I don't think they were ghosts. I think they were like energy signatures.
They call that a residual haunting. And it's where the land holds such a tremendous energetic signature that it replays like a DVR, just replaying back a section.
So
a
it
chapter.
literally was like walking into a historical reenactment.
Oh my God.
It was so cool.
So did you get anybody else to look? Were you like, holy hell?
No, because I didn't want to leave. I just sat there.
Wow.
And just watched it. The person that I was with was sleeping.
Oh, well, boo.
Yeah, no, it was fine.
No, but I mean, and so, we also see this. We hear reports of this in Gettysburg. We hear reports of this on plantations. Again, the eastern seaboard of the United States. And obviously, gang, the plantations, of course, were in the American South. Yet, what I find so interesting about this is that was also, don't you think it's weird that the most religiously fanatical people to ever get kicked out of England because they were so freaky. Like the English, you may or may not know this about the Pilgrims people. However, our founding fathers and mothers had 2 choices. England told them that they could go to their death because they were heretic religious freaks that were stoning people, that were trying to burn people, that were trying to drown people for being witches. England was like, you crazy biatches need to get out of here. So there were so many of them. And it posed England an interesting political problem, Melissa, because had England killed these people, then they were going to be accused. Because you got to remember, you guys, these pilgrims were kicked out of England during that time frame, that Reformationist time frame. So the Catholic Church was already getting kicked out of England by Henry VIII. And I think the Pilgrims might have predated that time period just a skosh, but Martin Luther was starting to get kicked up because Martin Luther was getting kicked up late 1500s, which bled over into the 1600s, which is the Reformist time frame. So England was having a lot of political problems that were surrounding all kinds of bizarre religions. And here comes the Pilgrims, because they were not Catholic. They were somewhat reformers, but they were weird. And England had just been through a crap storm of taking heat from other countries for being, even though they kicked the Catholic Church out, for being a religiously oppressive country. Okay, so you have to keep that in mind. And, this was a different time frame in England. So what we're looking at here, too, was, I think King George was king at that time. I believe, no, King George was king much later, hundreds of years later, actually. My history's screwed up because that's who, never mind. Scratch that from my record. So anyway, here's what happened. They kicked these people out, the Pilgrims in England. They kicked them out because they didn't want to be seen as killing them. And they figured they'd all die and drown in the New World anyway. So they gave them a choice. You can go to your death, we'll burn you or hang you or drown you, or you can get on a boat and go to the New World and you can claim it for England. Now, given that's your choices, these religious weirdos got on a boat and they came over here. So Melissa, my whole point about this is it's hysterical. It's karma that the, quote, founding fathers of colonized white America were religious, crazy, banished religious extremists that landed in the most haunted and crazed area of the United States that they possibly could have landed in. And of course, encountered the Native American cultures that were trying to tell them, don't settle over there. It's got soil ground. That's sour ground. That's bad ground. I mean, these people couldn't win for losing.
No. And that sounds a lot like the man that used to come to my bedroom. I think he was from that time frame, that religious fanatic time frame. I think that as like what I saw in Newport was probably 100 years later.
Yeah.
When things got like slightly more civilized.
Yeah, they did.
Yeah. But that very much feels like the man that used to visit me when I was a child.
Well, and that's creepy because we don't recognize, when we think about the Pilgrims, we put them in the same bucket as like Christopher Columbus or someone who was Cristobal Colombo, somebody who was coming over here as a sanctioned explorer. But they weren't. They were just regular people on a boat. They were given a captain because the king was like, hey, if you weird wackos get over there, I want to claim the land through your wacko butts. But they were given a captain. But when they landed, let's talk a little bit about, they encountered the native cultures who saw these poor flailing white people starving and dying and actually came in to help them because they were like, oh, you people. And the natives had a really hard time with the Pilgrims because the Pilgrims stunk. They didn't believe in bathing because they believed that the devil was in the water. So you have this native culture that naturally keeps very clean in the springs and with bear grease and all these other things, encountering these wretchedly stinking people who are starving and dying. Yet the Native Americans still reached out to help them. So let's talk about some of the native energies. Could you distinguish the native energies from the white people ghosts when you were there? And could you distinguish those from the land energy, which you now experience so much more of in Montana?
Wow, that is such an interesting question because I moved away from New England when I was 23 years old. So I was young when I lived there.
Right.
New England, the Native Americans in New England are so much different than the ones in the Western United States. Of course, New England has been settled for so much longer than Western North America has. So we don't really think about the Native Americans that much. They're just like a part of, they're just like a regular part of society and not differentiated that much.
Right.
So historically, honestly, didn't think about it that much. Going back now and hiking in the woods there now, I probably would give that a whole lot more thought. The Native Americans there were not they didn't travel like the ones out here.
They weren't nomadic.
They were not nomadic. They lived in one place and had villages. So it was an absolutely different culture than what we think of.
Right.
So honestly, when I lived there, I probably did not differentiate that energy very much.
Wow.
And also it was so ancient. You know, I mean, the Native Americans there have been a part of our regular society for 300 years.
Right.
So it's just thinking about it really isn't as much of a thing. And as far as you asked me about the place energy.
Yeah.
I think it's so different there because we have hardwood forests, which we don't have so much in the Western United States, which, you know, like maple trees and oak trees that are 300 years old. So I think that they hang on to a lot of the energy of the things that have happened around them. Also in like hiking, I'm a big hiker. So when you say place energy, I'm always thinking about what's going on out in the woods, you know, because that's where I like to spend my time. So in New England, out in the woods, one huge thing is that there's nowhere that you can go out in the woods that there aren't remnants of civilization. So here, we can go all over the place and never see, maybe we'll see a teepee ring once or twice, but like never see foundations or stuff, like remnants of white settlers. But in New England, it's everywhere. Everywhere, like around where I grew up, there's foundations from homes of people that lived there in the 1600s. In fact, that area was a major town where my parents live now, and now it's wooded. So I think that like people have been there for so long. And they've built things, and that energy's there. The trees are so old, and we have old trees here too.
No, but not like those. Some of those oaks are like 1,000 years old too, aren't they? I mean, there's like 1,000-year-old oak tree on the West Coast. They estimate it to be that big and that old, and it's a very sacred tree to the Temecula Native tribe down there. And it's their sacred oak. So, I mean, I've just heard that they can be that old. I don't know.
I'm sure they can. There probably aren't very many that old in New England because we came and cut them all down.
Oh, man.
But yeah,
you guys.
But there's some old ones. I mean, like New England started, I mean, the people were building the first houses there in the late 1600s. So, you know, there's been trees next to people's homes for 300 years.
Wow.
So there's definitely some old trees there, but the energy is much different, probably for all the reasons that we've discussed.
Right.
You know, plus the fact that there have been people living there, not just small Native American villages, but there's been big settlements of people for hundreds of years already there. So all that energy is there.
Well, you know what's weird? When I go visit New York City in Manhattan, and I've only been there a handful of times, and generally it was for work. And I was flown out there from Los Angeles to do celebrity casts of vagina monologues or, you know, whatever celebrity fundraiser I was part of or whatnot. And so when we were there, what I found so interesting was the first few days in New York, I'm loving it. I'm killing it. We're having a great time. And then this fatigue of being on this iron granite-based island that's got water all the way around it and hundreds of years of spirits, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of compounded layers of people. Plus you've got 8 million people, give or take some change there, all living on that one little island, canyons of buildings. I mean, I think people who thrive on the East Coast either don't notice it or they're built to be able to handle that much electromagnetic output. There's a density out there that's insane. And I'm fascinated by it. And whenever I meet folks from New England, the Northeast, they have a different way about them, you know? And I kind of get, like when I first met you, Melissa, when I first met you, I just, you know, met you in passing and whatnot. But I remember thinking, wow, this chick really seems familiar to me. I don't know why. Like I thought I knew you from somewhere. I probably do, for God's sakes. But I thought, this is just so weird. How would I know you? This is odd. And I've noticed that a lot of the Northeastern folk that I do know are so used to dealing with paranormal stuff you guys are dialed in on a different frequency. And that frequency to me feels very familiar because it's where I operate 100% of my life. And so I'm like, oh, there's somebody else who gets the ghost channel. There's somebody else who gets the paranormal channel, and it's like, I got a ghost. Okay, whatever. And we in the West, ghosts are so novel out here. We're like, ooh, we've got a ghost, ooh, it's crazy. Now, here's a question I was going to ask you a bit ago. And I was kind of formulating it and how to ask it. And I wanted to present the tenets of what could make the East Coast haunted before I asked you this. Have you ever been to a place on the East Coast in New England that you could differentiate a human spirit from a non-human spirit? Like, say, a demonic entity. Have you ever felt that energy there specifically as opposed to a human spirit?
Yeah, this is interesting because you asked me earlier if I had ever been to a place where my little voice screamed, you have to get out of here because something bad happened. And there was one other place. And that was the place that I think there may have been something that wasn't just your everyday ghost. So we went to, a couple years ago, actually, my kids' family on their dad's side lives in southwestern Connecticut, in the same town, Monroe, Connecticut, where the Warrens live. Lorraine
and Ed Warren. Who, of course, I'll just insert this for those who may not know who that is. Lorraine and Ed Warren were groundbreaking paranormal investigators. Lorraine Warren, rest her soul, died fairly recently. And she died at quite an elderly age. Lorraine was one of the very first psychics, mediums, spirit translators, and also worked with her husband, Ed, who was a paranormal investigator. And they really hit fame, if you want to call it that, although they weren't really looking for the fame, but they hit fame working on the house in Amityville, that we all know as the Amityville Horror. So it was from that they just kind of catapulted. And younger generations might remember Lorraine Warren from the show Paranormal State. She came on to Paranormal State with Ryan Buell when that show was on, and she would investigate there. She also did other little guest appearances on Ghost Adventures, and Lorraine made her transition from, after her husband Ed died, from paranormal investigation to television investigation. And she was a really neat lady. And she actually begun her career just going to people's homes, ended her career on television. So that is the Warrens that we're talking about. So circling back to your story.
So the Warrens also, correct me if I'm wrong, a lot of their investigations had to do with demonic activity, not necessarily ghosts.
That's actually very true. And they were one of the very few, thanks for bringing that up, Melissa. They were one of the very few paranormal investigation teams that were sanctioned by the Catholic Church to actually begin the exorcism process. They had to bring a priest in, but Ed Warren was sanctioned to begin the exorcism process. So yes, a lot of their stuff was demonic investigation.
So one of the things that they did with every investigation, or a lot of times there would be an item. You may have heard of the doll Annabelle.
Oh yeah.
She's in movies and stuff.
Right.
That they would keep the item that the demonic activity originated from. Would that be the right terminology?
Centered in, used as a fulcrum, yeah.
So they kept this, and they created a place to store all these things because they thought they would be safer in their possession than if they were out in the world. So this place that they stored their things in happened to be this little garage-like building next door to their home.
Gross.
Yeah. And so as Lorraine got older, their son, Tony, created actually a museum where you could go in and look at this stuff.
Oh my God.
So that day it was my kids, my sister, my niece, a whole bunch of us, 2 cars worth of people went down there and decided we were going to go look at Annabelle and all the other stuff in there. Yeah. And a parade of weird things happened to us on our way there. Everything from it being difficult to find the place to there was nowhere to park. The house was unmarked. So the house was super hard to find. The neighbor guy freaking out and telling us he was going to call the police if we parked there. So the whole thing felt weird at first. And then we all walked down to the museum and met Tony. And it was like screaming in our heads. It was like, you guys don't go in there. And we did take a minute after we met Tony to talk to each other. And all of us were like, nope, not going. Don't want to go.
So what did that feel like? That feeling of I don't want to go?
It was super simple. It wasn't even like, it was like something clicked in all our minds, and it was just like, we just don't want to do that anymore. There wasn't any big voice screaming in our head, or it was just this dark feeling. And all of us at the same moment decided that that was not an activity that we wanted to do. And in fact, when we talked about it later, all of us, even to this day, were like, God, I'm glad we didn't do that.
Well, and and what can happen too, there's a couple of modalities here. And what I mean by that is when you're dealing with demonic or heavily dark energy, and demonic energy is real. I know I don't talk a whole lot about it because why? Mm-hmm. It's not as strong as light. It's like talking about the gum that gets in the treads of your tennis shoes if you step on it. We don't need to do necessarily podcast after podcast after podcast on the gum in your shoe. That doesn't really make any sense to me. However, demonic activity is real. Demons are real. They're a real spiritual piece of the framework, and they actually serve a function, not super well with humanity, but they serve a function in the weighted balance of light and dark and all these things. So what you can have when you have a lot of demonically possessed items, people will say, well, I don't understand why a demon would possess a thing. Well, let me tell you why. Because human beings are notoriously difficult to possess. We are beings of light. We literally have little pieces of God inside of us, little sparks of light. And that little tiny, eensy-weensy little spark of light is way more than one demon can handle. So usually it has to be a group of demons all getting together. Imagine a bunch of frat boys linking arms and running into a 12-foot tall chain link fence, trying to run it over and trying to knock it over and over and over again. And it takes a whole bunch of them to try to poke a hole through the fence. That's what it takes to possess a person. It's not either that or that person has to be on a vortex portal that is an opening for that dark demonic energy, and the vortex portal begins to just naturally drain the person. So it drains the person's resources and light just a bit, and it makes it easier for one or two entities to kind of get in there and do its thing. But what we're talking about here, and the reason I want to differentiate this, Melissa, is that the group of you were outside the museum.
Mm-hmm. Standing right outside the door. And just like to clarify, we had no fear of demons. We didn't go there afraid of demons. We weren't afraid at all. We just wanted to see it. I think it was like the concentration. They have hundreds of things in this one space. That it's like a garage with a concrete foundation, like a knee wall that's kind of waist high. So there's concrete all around it. And I feel like it's just super concentrated in there. I don't know.
Well, and the other thing about it too is whenever we have a big prompt that's like, yeah, you don't need to go do this. That's a lot of time our angelic beings, by the way.
Oh.
And that really simple, like, yeah, you probably don't need to do this. Not a good idea.
Yeah. And I also had a little girl, like a 13-year-old, my 12 or 13-year-old girl. So she could have accidentally touched something. And I
You're
thought
talking
that was
about in real life. You had a 13-year-old
Yeah, my daughter was with us. Yeah.
So, when we get that, no, not a good idea. Just don't do it. A lot of times that's our angels. And it's not because we're going to go in and darkness is so strong that it'll suck our soul out our eye sockets and we fall to the floor convulsing and screaming for Jesus to help us. It's not that dramatic. What can happen is we can walk into those areas, again, keeping in mind that what area of the country is this in, Melissa, this museum in? What area of the country?
Right, it's in Connecticut, New England.
It's in Connecticut. Yeah. It's in New England.
Yep.
So you're already walking onto the grounds of this place, which is a demonically It's got lots of demon heavy energy and darkness heavy energy. The Warrens were called in on some nasty spirits, even dark human spirits that got into alignment with evil stuff and blah, blah, blah. So the stuff in that museum was just gross. Like, if I could give you guys an equivocation, it would be like if you literally went to a museum to see articles dipped in poop. It's going to stink. It's going to be disgusting. You're going to walk through there. You're going to leave and your hair's going to smell like poop.
Yeah.
You're going to get sick. There's going to be poop smell stuck in your nose. That's the same thing that we're talking about with demonic. It's called demonic oppression. And that kind of dark energy, it's thick. It changes the ethers. It makes a room very heavy. So your angels in your whole group were probably like, you know what, you guys, there's one thing to look at a scary thing, but y'all are going to walk through there and smell like poop for the rest of the day. Also, demonic oppression, that low vibration that is darkness can actually cause nausea, depression. I mean, it can cause all kinds of really not good things, And so, when you're looking at all of that, and you're understanding that there is this this weight there. And you're understanding that it's amplified by the natural East Coast energies. Like, all of that is just intense. Mm-hmm. It's really, really intense. And so have you ever felt... the demonic stuff at the Warren Museum. Anywhere else, that you've been in the East Coast that you could... And there's a reason I'm asking you about all this, and I'm keeping an eye on our time here. I'm asking about this for a reason. Was there ever a time when you happened upon more demonic activity than ghosts?
No.
Okay.
No. And ghosts, like I said, in New England, children talk about at school what ghosts are in their house. I mean, it is like such the demonic thing. Oh my
God, that's so funny.
I think the experience at the Warren house was kind of like a one-off thing. Ghosts are an everyday normal part of our life. And so, it's not really that scary. We're like, no, my ghost is better than your ghost. Or like, my ghost throws balls down the attic stairs,
Oh my God. My ghost actually has a face. How about your ghost? Yeah. Your ghost is just see-through and white and a creepy pilgrim.
It's like normal life, honestly.
Wow. Mm-hmm. So if you look at, and I think that's so fantastic because that area of the country was founded by religious extremists who did not believe in spirits. And then they became them.
That's so interesting.
That's called karma.
They may have been
That's
too
karma.
scared to cross over.
God, really? By that time, they had sex with a Native American and thought they were going to burn in hell.
Yeah.
Oh my God! So, the reason I ask about that is because some of the most heavy demonic hauntings that have ever been documented are in the in the New England area or the East Coast. And that is because of the natural swinging door effect of the ley lines, the underground water sources, the big caverns, the granite base. And it's not to say that they're very common because they aren't. Yet that was where the Warrens lived.
Right. They lived there for a reason. And I think they did a lot of their work in New England and New York.
They did.
Like the Amityville Horror was in New York.
Absolutely. Yeah. And so just to touch on the Amityville Horror, there's people who say that it was bogus and the Warrens were just chasing press and blah, blah, blah. Well, I had an opportunity when I was on a radio show for a long time in Los Angeles on LA Talk Radio. I had the opportunity to interview Lorraine Warren in person. And that's just like, if you're somebody who is in my field, Melissa, that is the holy grail of somebody who does that.
No,
work.
I think that's super cool. Even I think that's incredibly cool. Oh. I stood in her front yard.
Shut up. That's cool. So, literally, it was a thing. And so when I was interviewing Lorraine, when you're wired like I am and you speak to people, you can feel the vibration of who they are through their voice. You can hear their story. You can hear if they're full of beans. You can hear where their fears are. You can hear what they're making up. That comes through the energy of people. And Lorraine Warren, honest to God, was just a lady that was trying to help. Mm-hmm. There was nothing sensationalistic about that lady. Not one tiny thing. She was very quiet, very subdued, and she just wanted to help out. And again, she started her career seeing angels and talking with angels. And that's when she realized that there were people who needed help with this catch the gum in the bottom of your tennis shoe, pain in the butt, demonic stuff. So, when we do this whole big wraparound on the East Coast of the United States, one of the reasons I wanted to bring you on, Melissa, is because I know that in that culture, ghosts are normalized. Mm-hmm. And I think if we had less of a wow factor about the fact that once we get out of our body, we're all going to be a ghost. Cross over, please. If you don't cross over, you're a ghost, okay? So just cross over and go be a spirit. And that effect of taking the fear out of it and like, hey, my ghost is better than your ghost. My ghost throws a ball. That is really important. And there is a difference. You can feel the difference between a standard haunting, which will just kind of give you the creeps or make your hair on the back of your neck stand up, or a demonic haunting. And I'm really hitting that hard this time of year in our spooky Halloween time because I get tired of everybody making everything into a demon.
Right, yeah.
That's really popular in my field. And it's not acceptable because everything's not a demon and there's no reason to freak people out for nothing. Mm-hmm. And so, would there be any wisdom you could leave to people that if they do have a ghost in their house, how you deal with ghosts as a New Englander?
Well, I just had an experience with a friend that's staying with a friend of hers in New England this week. It was yesterday. And she expressed some concerns because she felt like the house that she was staying in was haunted. And I said, don't worry about it. She's like, how can I sleep here? And I said, well, don't worry about it. I grew up with them and they're not going to hurt you. There's honestly nothing to be afraid of for the most part. I'm sure there's situations where perhaps you should be scared. But then listen to your little voice, people, please.
Yeah, right. Listen to your inner voice.
But in my experience, the guy standing next to my bed was super scary for a kid, but he actually never hurt me.
Right.
So I honestly don't think for the most part that ghosts are that dangerous. Am I wrong?
No, they're not dangerous. And oftentimes they want to be crossed over. Oftentimes they want to talk. Mm-hmm. Oftentimes they have something they want to tell you or tell me. That's why I was wondering if you ever asked that weird guy, what he wanted. Mm-hmm. Now, did you get to a certain age, back to the childhood ghost in your bedroom that we believe to be like an ancient Puritan or creeper somewhere there? Ancient Puritan, the new punk band. Do you feel... Has that guy been back to visit you since you were an adult?
No, but he hasn't. At least I've not been able to see him if he has. But there's definitely a sense of sort of like foreboding around my parents' house. I don't like sleeping there. My kids don't really like sleeping there. I hope they don't listen to this. And my kind of psychic niece doesn't like to sleep there. We can, but we don't love it. And weird things happen there all the time.
Like what?
Like the last time I was there, I was sleeping in their guest room and the window was open. They live in the country. They do not live in the city. So there would be no circumstances where someone was actually walking by their house.
Right.
And it was kind of a misty, rainy night. And I woke up at about 2:00 in the morning, because I hear something. And I'm listening and I can hear footsteps.
Outside?
Like under my window. Like somebody walking under my window.
Oh, God.
There's like never would that happen because they live in the middle of nowhere. And so the next morning I asked my dad, were you up in the night? Did you like go outside, get the paper super early, something like that? And he's like, no, I didn't get up early. So stuff like that happens all the time. I can't they have this ground floor room, like a daylight basement. Which has an outside door and windows that open to the outside, which they like to leave open. And I actually won't let my kids sleep down there. They have to sleep upstairs.
Wow.
Just because it is this weird foreboding sense in their house.
And what's interesting, too, is it's important to point out that in that section of the United States of America, that's where we see the Jersey Devil. That's where the Mothman reports are. And the Jersey Devil is an elemental, and they come through, they're interdimensionals. They're pretty awesome and creepy. So hopefully you got an opportunity to learn a little bit about, folks listening today, got an opportunity to listen and key in on New England and the Eastern Seaboard and why it's a little more haunted than normal. Maybe you learned some things today in our fun October Spook Fest of particular podcasts we're doing this time. And so, Melissa, just to close here, it's interesting because we're talking about ghosts. You and I are hosting the Haunted Bridger Ghost Hunt.
Yes.
And people can get those tickets online. And they can go to my website at danielleegnew-advisor.com and search the events page. There are 4 different times on 2 different days. And tell us a little bit how much that costs and what people get with that admission.
So it's actually only $25 a person. And the days are October 18th at 7 p.m. and at 10 p.m. and October 19th at 7 p.m. and 10 p.m. And with that, we have a little gathering in my store, Vintage Apothecary, where we might have some spiced cider and some mulled wine. And then we will take off and walk around the town of Bridger, go in some old buildings, check out some basements, see what we see going on there. It's going to be super fun.
It is going to be fun. So if anybody happens to be in Bridger, Montana, we really want to make these events affordable for people so they can actually go and they can experience, what it feels like to actually be in the presence of a being. And I'll be doing some spirit interpretation should these beings actually show up and want to talk. And so I'll do some translation, which will be really, really cool. So again, you can go online, get those tickets for $25 at danielleegnew-advisor.com/events. If you happen to be in Montana and Bridger, we would love to see you there. That would be so much fun. And Melissa, where can people find you online?
They can find me at vintageapothecaryshop.com, or again, with the tickets or with any questions, you can always call me at 406-850-3287, and I can hook you up with tickets if you're having any trouble with the website. And I'm also in Billings sometimes, so I would love to see you guys. Also, some crazy stuff has happened in Bridger over the years, so it's a great place for a ghost hunt.
Oh, I know. This is really awesome. You can also find Melissa, of course, on Instagram and Facebook. Melissa Scianna, Vintage Apothecary. Melissa, thank you for coming in today.
Thank you. So much fun to talk about my home place.
Right?
Yeah.
It's totally awesome.
Yeah.
So we're actually going to keep Melissa for the remainder of our Spooky October series because she's kind of my ghost hunting buddy, and plus we do a lot of projects together. So Melissa, until next time, and everybody, I will see you next week.